Okay, so this week you guys have sent us on like a really fascinating deep dive. And it's something that I have to admit, I haven't really looked into all that much, but now that I'm looking into it, it is kind of blowing my mind a little bit. We're talking about blood flow restriction training.
Yeah, BFR.
IFR, yeah, exactly. And it does sound kind of intense when you just hear it like that. So our mission today is to really break this down, understand what's going on, and explore how it could help you build muscle, maybe get stronger, all that kind of stuff. And of course, we want to get into how safe it is and really important stuff about how to implement it properly, if at all. And you guys gave us some really great articles from physiotherapy, sports medicine, all that.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff here. We've got sources like Physio Hub, the Journal of Sports Medicine and Physical Fitness, Frontiers in Physiology. There's even stuff from the Cleveland Clinic in Science and Medicine in Sport. So yeah, lots to unpack, lots to work with.
Excellent. So I think for anyone who is like blood flow restriction, maybe they've heard of it, maybe they haven't. What is this all about?
I think the easiest way to visualize it is you're using these specialized bands or cuffs, and you're usually putting them around your upper arms or legs.
Okay.
And what they're doing is they're gently squeezing. They're partially slowing down the blood flow that's leaving your muscles while you exercise. And I think that key word there is partially, right? Because the Physio Hub article clarifies that you're still getting fresh, oxygen-rich blood going into the muscle, but it's more about the blood that's trying to get back out.
So it's not like a complete tourniquet situation.
No, not at all, not at all. And that's where it gets really interesting, because the research in Frontiers in Physiology suggests that this restriction, this slight restriction, it essentially tricks your muscles into thinking that they're working way harder than they actually are. And this appears to kickstart a lot of the pathways that are responsible for muscle growth. One in particular, the mTOR pathway, which is like the master switch that tells your muscles to grow.
Oh, wow. So you could be lifting lighter weights and your muscles are getting a signal like, hey, time to bulk up, time to grow.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that the Journal of Sports Medicine and Physical Fitness, they pointed out that it's not just about muscle. Their research hinted at this, and this is pretty interesting, potential improvement in your ability to use oxygen during exercise. So your aerobic capacity may actually improve, and even in keeping your bones strong.
Really? Bone health too?
Yeah, and that was something that I found really interesting in both men and women, and I wouldn't have thought that that would have been a benefit.
Yeah, not an immediate connection for me when you think about restricting blood flow.
Yeah, but if you really dig into the mechanics, the Physio Hub article explained that by limiting this outflow of blood, the muscle itself, it's experiencing a faster depletion of oxygen, and they call this hypoxia.
Okay.
And this triggers a cascade of metabolic reactions, and essentially it ramps up the anabolic processes, which is like the building of new muscle tissue, and at the same time it dials down proteolysis, which is the breakdown of muscle.
Oh, interesting. So it's like, I'm imagining the muscle is in like a low oxygen environment, and so it's like, oh, we need to do something here. We need to protect ourselves. We need to build.
Right, exactly. It goes into survival mode, essentially, and I think this is where we see a lot of the applications, and the articles highlight this, because BFR could be really beneficial for people who can't handle lifting heavy weights.
Yeah.
So imagine, someone older with arthritis where doing heavy squats is just out of the question.
Right.
Or someone who's rehabbing after a surgery. BFR provides a way to still stimulate muscle growth and strength gains using much lighter weights, and obviously you're putting a lot less stress on the joints, which can be a really big positive.
That makes a lot of sense, particularly in those situations. So what kind of benefits are we seeing in the research? What did the studies find when they actually put BFR to the test?
I think the Journal of Sports Medicine and Physical Fitness is really a great source for that, because they did studies with athletes, and what they found was that when these athletes incorporated BFR into their traditional resistance training, they saw these significant increases in muscle size.
Wow.
And noticeable improvements in their strength, and even enhanced performance in their sport, which is amazing. I mean, that's a powerful combination.
Yeah, so it's like you're adding it in and you're getting that extra boost.
Exactly. You're amplifying things, and the Physio Hub piece reinforced this as well. They emphasized that BFR can kickstart this muscle growth without needing that significant tissue breakdown, that overload that you often get with very heavy lifting. So this is why it's becoming such a valuable tool in the rehab world, because you can strengthen muscles around an injury without putting excessive strain on those healing tissues.
Yeah, that makes sense. It seems like a pretty versatile tool. Now, obviously, we've talked about some of the potential upsides, some of the ways it would be beneficial, but with something like this that is really impacting blood flow and muscle response, we have to talk about the potential downsides. So What kind of risks did our sources flag?
Well, the Physio Hub article, they list out several. Things like dizziness or even that pins and needles feeling, that numbness.
Okay, so those are things you want to avoid.
Yes, for sure. And they also mention subcutaneous hemorrhage, which are essentially just small bruises under the skin where the bands were. But more seriously, and this is something that people should be aware of, is the possibility of rhabdomyolysis, which is a condition where damaged muscle tissue releases harmful substances into your bloodstream.
Oh, wow. That doesn't sound good. And what about the cardiovascular system? Is there any impact on your heart, blood pressure, things like that?
Yeah, that's another area of concern. The research does point to potential cardiovascular effects for some people, and this could involve things like a temporary increase in blood pressure during your training session. There's also, although less common, the risk of thrombosis, which is the formation of blood clots. And the articles very wisely caution that these risks may be heightened for individuals who already have pre-existing conditions, heart conditions, high blood pressure, kidney problems, or diabetes.
Right, so if you have anything like that going on, this is definitely not something to just strap on and go.
Precisely, and the Physio Hub article really emphasizes that. They say BFR can be a safe and effective technique, but proper screening to identify any potential risks is absolutely essential. And ideally, the training should be supervised by someone who knows what they're doing, a qualified professional.
Right, so this is not a DIY kind of situation. And also, I know that our sources mentioned some situations where this is a complete no-go. There are certain people who should absolutely not be doing BFR.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Cleveland Clinic provided a really clear list of what they call contraindications. So basically, things that rule you out from BFR. And they say that BFR should not be used if you're pregnant, if you have any kind of active infection, if you have a history of blood clotting disorders, if you have recently fractured a bone, or if you're currently undergoing treatment for cancer. So those are all absolute no-nos.
Okay, so really important list to keep in mind there. Now, let's say you are a suitable candidate, you've been screened, you're good to go. What about actually implementing BFR? How do you do it right?
Well, the Journal of Science in Medicine and Sport had some good insights here. They highlighted that using what they call low-load BFR training can be really effective at creating that stimulus that makes your muscles grow.
Okay.
And this can be either in addition to your regular strength training or even as a replacement when heavy lifting is not an option.
Okay, interesting. So it's still giving you that overload, but without actually having to, pile on the weight.
Right, and the cool part is you're not causing significant muscle damage in the process.
Now, what about these bands? How tight should they be? Because that seems like a really crucial detail.
Oh yeah, the Physio Hug article gives some general guidelines for that. For your arms, they suggest aiming for a restriction level and about 30% to 50% of your full blood flow occlusion, so you're not cutting it off completely.
Right.
And for the legs, it's a little bit tighter. They recommend around 50% to 80%.
Okay, so how do you even know if you're in that range? Is it some kind of special device?
I mean, there are specialized devices that measure the exact pressure, but in practice, a lot of it comes down to your perceived tightness.
Okay.
So the guidance is usually that the bands should feel snug, like a firm hug around the limb, but not so tight that they're completely cutting off your circulation.
Right.
You should still be able to feel your pulse below the band. And this is, again, where the guidance of an experienced professional can be so valuable.
Right, so you don't want to just be guessing.
Not at all. It's all about finding that sweet spot.
Okay, so you've got the band on. How long are we keeping this thing on during a workout?
The Cleveland Clinic recommends that the band should only be worn for a limited time, typically between 8 and 20 minutes total for either your arms or legs during a training session.
Really? So it's not for the entire workout. It's very specific.
Exactly. And this often breaks down into sets of exercises with short rest periods where the bands remain on.
Interesting. So again, it's all about the controlled application, not just strapping it on and going for an hour.
Exactly. And as the Physio Hub article stressed, it's really important to take an individualized approach. So if someone's considering trying BFR on their own, and again, that's not generally recommended, they should absolutely start slowly, using lower restriction levels, shorter durations, and strictly sticking to those guidelines.
Yeah, it really does sound like having some expert oversight here is crucial.
It is, and the articles really hammered this home. They stressed the responsibility of clinicians and qualified trainers to have a really solid understanding of the risks involved, to do proper screenings, and to use their judgment to decide if BFR is even the right approach.
Okay, so that makes sense. Now, the Physio Hub article finished off with some key takeaways from their experts.
Yes, they did.
What were their main points? What did they really want to drive home?
They basically had 3 core messages.
Okay.
First, they said BFR training is indeed effective at boosting strength and muscle growth, even when you're lifting lighter loads.
Yeah.
Second, proper screening and ongoing supervision from a trained professional are absolutely essential.
Makes sense.
And finally, they said that the way you use BFR needs to be tailored to each individual person,
Okay.
the right amount of pressure, how long you wear the bands, your specific goals. All of that has to be taken into account. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Got it. So to recap, blood flow restriction training. Really interesting method, a lot of potential. It seems like it's especially promising for building muscle and strength when you can't do that traditional heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And we've seen how it sort of like tricks your muscles into growing even with lighter weights.
Exactly. It gives you another way to get at those muscle building pathways.
But really important point here, we've got to be careful.
Absolutely.
You know, dizziness, numbness, rupture hemolysis, cardiovascular issues, all these things are possible.
Especially if you have pre-existing conditions.
Exactly. And we talked about those contraindications from the Cleveland Clinic. Those are the situations where BFR is a definite no.
Right. And even if it seems like BFR could be right for you, it's crucial to have that proper screening, that expert guidance.
Yeah, the band tightness, the duration, all that stuff.
It all matters. You can't just wing it with this.
Okay, so I want to leave our listeners with a final thought here. Given everything we've discussed, the potential, the risks, the need for professional guidance, what aspects of your current fitness goals or your health situation would lead you to, explore BFR training further?
Yeah, what would make you want to have that conversation with a qualified professional?
Exactly. It's definitely worth considering, but only with the right guidance.
Absolutely. Don't try this at home.
Exactly. All right, well, that's our deep dive into blood flow restriction training. Really interesting stuff.
Fascinating topic. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And to all our listeners, as always, stay curious, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.